We'd invited a bunch of our friends and family up for just a day at the lake, just to enjoy, cook out, enjoy the summer weather, be out on the boat. They all knew what was coming. She did not. And it was a fun day. We were deeply in love, right? And it was a great day. And over the next 18 months, we got married in December of 1999. That way I could remember how many years I'd been married for the rest of my life. Get married just before the millennium, and then I could remember from then on. And but we were very, very much in love. And over those 18 months that we were engaged, we got all kinds of advice, right, from friends and family. We had friends that were getting married just ahead of us, the months leading up to our own wedding. We had friends from church that had been married, some of them for decades. It gave all kinds of advice. The one thing we kept hearing, though, over and over and over again is, the first year is the hardest. I'm like, that doesn't feel good. That's not very encouraging. But we just kept hearing, oh man, if you just get through the first year is the hardest. Get through the first year, you're fine. And we got married, and the first year, honestly, was just a lot of fun. We didn't have any kids. We didn't have any responsibilities. We lived in a parsonage directly across the street from the church, and we were doing youth ministry, and so there were kids around all the time that weren't ours, so we could do dumb stuff with them, and then they would get in trouble from their parents, and we were off scot-free. It was great. It was a really enjoyable season of life. We got through the first year, and we're like, well, if that was the worst, we got smooth sailing from here on out. And then people started saying, well, no, not the first year. Yeah, it's tough, but year 7's really where, people kind of run into difficulties. You've usually got a few kids by then, and expenses are, kind of on the rise with children, and you haven't really started making a lot of money then. And we're like, well, we went into ministry. We weren't planning to make a lot of money ever, but that's when it's really tough. Year 7 is when it's difficult. And then we got to year 7, and we're like, that was kind of okay. And then we hear about the 10-year itch where, couples go through this period of kind of drifting apart after a decade of marriage. And every time we cross one of these seasons, we're like, no, that was okay. Somebody else is like, oh no, you haven't got to the hard part yet. And I'm like, what is going on? Dating was great, and it was fun, and we saw the world through rose-colored glasses because, again, we were just so in love and infatuated with each other. We just kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. And to tell you the truth, I don't know what she would say, I've really enjoyed being married. It's been pretty great for the last 25 years. It's been awesome. But there are a lot of people that struggle. And we date, and we think dating is so fun and so enjoyable and honestly kind of so easy most of the time. What would make marriage so difficult? Why is marriage so hard? Today I want to talk about 4 practices that I think can be helpful for marriages that are struggling. Or if you aren't married yet and you're thinking about, kind of narrowing down your options, if you have somebody in mind and marriage is on the horizon, there are some things that we can do in our relationship with our spouses that I believe help deepen the relationship you have with your husband or wife, that help strengthen the foundation that your marriage sits on, and can help kind of promote this intimacy and this stability through life's both ups and downs. Because it will happen, right? We have seasons that are great and wonderful, and then we have seasons that are difficult. And so this morning what I'd like to do is talk about right practices for healthy, vibrant, and growing marriages. If you're interested, you can come along with me on this little journey, right? The first one is all about building the deepest, most intimate connection with your spouse possible. And this happens kind of willingly during dating, and then for some reason, some couples believe that once they get married, they've done the hard work, right? They've done the connecting. You've talked about all the things that there are to talk about. How many kids do you want? And what do you want life to look like? And what are your hopes and dreams? And all that's done. And you get married and you move into the same house. And you start sharing all of your stuff, your possessions, your resources. And all of a sudden, the connection stops. Or at least the intentional initiation of those connections stops. And we need, as husbands and wives, to continue that practice of connecting with one another. This is the first practice of a healthy marriage, is to never stop practicing the art of connecting with your spouse. And when I say connecting with, I mean physically, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, looking for ways to deepen the relationship, to bring in a greater sense of intimacy and unity and oneness. We read in Genesis chapter 2 that a man leaves his father and mother and is, in the NIV, united with his wife, and they become one flesh. The English Standard Version doesn't use the word united. It says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They hold fast. The King James Version says, cleave to his wife. Others say, cling to his wife. All of these are good terms, good images of what needs to happen in our relationship with our spouse. There is a clinging to, a grasping, and a holding on to. Two people become one through this divinely kind of brought together relationship where God unites them and makes them one flesh, but there is effort to be had on the part of the husband and wife as well. They cling to one another. They cleave to one another. They hold fast to one another as we seek closeness with our spouses. It starts by clinging, by grasping a hold of. This is so important that when Israel began to establish itself, not just as a nation of people, but a culture, as God was bringing his people toward the land that he had promised to Abraham, he gave them instructions, right? At Mount Sinai, he gave them the 10 Commandments, but then as you read through Leviticus and Deuteronomy and some of these other Old Testament books, you see that God gives all kinds of instructions to his people on how life is meant to be lived together. And one of the instructions that he gives specifically to married people, I find fascinating. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, God says, if a man has recently married, he must not be sent to war or have any other duty laid on him. For 1 year, he is to be free to stay at home and bring happiness to the wife he has married. Wow. You see, God understands that first year of marriage, whether it's easy or difficult, depending on the personalities that have come together. I do think that there are some marriages that the adjustments to be made in that first year are challenging, are difficult. There are others that, because of their personalities, they just kind of seem to figure it out, and it's not that big of a deal. Either way, there is an intimacy and a connection, a bond that needs to be formed in the early stages, in that first year of marriage, that apparently God understands. Who knew, as creator of the universe, right? And he commands his people, for the first year, a husband's primary responsibility is to stay at home, to learn who his wife is, what are her needs, what are her desires, and to give himself fully to bringing happiness to the wife that he's married. When it says that he's have no other duty, these are national duties, okay? It doesn't mean that he can't work or have a job. It doesn't mean that he can't be, in society. It just means he can't be required by the king to have national responsibilities where he goes off and serves the country away from home, where he would be away from her for days or weeks or even months on end. For the first year, God commands husbands, focus on your wives. Learn who she is. Get to know who she is, what she desires, what she needs. Connect physically, connect emotionally, connect spiritually and relationally. Here's the trick. Husbands and wives connect differently. So while this instruction sounds great, and we can encourage young husbands, make your primary focus connecting with your wife, a lot of times young men aren't very good at connecting with the young woman in their lives. And that's because the connections that women create and the ways that men create those same connections are very, very differently. Many years ago, Sarah and I led a Sunday school class for adults. We used the book Love and Respect by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. And in the book, he talks about a study that was done years and years ago. It was an experiment where they would bring two people into an empty room. The only thing in the room was two chairs sitting side by side. And they would bring in either two women or two men, always strangers. They didn't know each other before the experiment, but they would bring in two women and sit them in the chairs with no instructions, and they would leave them in there for an extended period of time, for an hour or better. Or they would bring in two men, again, perfect strangers, set them in chairs side by side, no instructions, and leave them in there for an hour to see what would happen. It's kind of like putting two bugs in a jar, right? See if they fight. So what they observed was overwhelmingly the women, when placed in a room, empty room, no instructions, chairs side by side, within minutes, the women would turn the chairs toward each other. And they would begin to carry conversation. The men occasionally would also turn their chairs toward each other and start sharing information. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for a living? Tell me about your family, right? Like, what are some things you like to do? Sometimes the men would do that, but a lot of time, much more than the women, the men would leave the chairs right where they were, and they would sit there in silence for the entire duration of the experiment. No words. Fascinating behavior. Women turn toward each other, they face one another, and they share information. Men sit there, just waiting for the time to be up. As fascinating as the experiment was, what they found after the experiment was even more interesting. They conducted a series of surveys with those who had been involved in the experiment. And they asked questions about the connection that they had made with the other individual in this experiment. And by their study, they found that the men, on average, experienced a deeper level of connection with one another and commitment to one another than the women did. What? The men didn't say a word. The women shared their life stories, and the women felt like they had made a fast connection, almost an immediate connection, but most of the women described the connection that they felt with the other woman as shallow. It was okay, but it didn't have real depth to it, where the men felt like they had gone through an uncomfortable, awkward, traumatizing situation with a brother, and they felt this deep sense of connection and relationship because they had endured this terrible experience together. The men's connections, the felt connection, was deeper than the women's. They approached the situation very differently, and the connections they felt were also different. Men and women, not surprisingly, are different, aren't they? We connect differently. And so it's easy for us to read a passage like Deuteronomy and go, oh, okay, so for the first year, we just got to work really hard at making these deep connections and having good conversation. But we have to also remember that the way a wife feels deep connection with another person is probably very different than the way her husband feels same deep connections. So how do we do so? A couple things that I think we can work toward, we can practice in our marriages. First of all, we need to share information. We need to practice being open and transparent with one another. And obviously, this is easier said than done. Men tend to just take care of things and do things, and they don't use a lot of words. Men, we need to talk more with our wives. Sarah and I had a conversation yesterday. I need to share more regularly and more openly with her. I don't do that with my guy friends. They don't need that information. But if I'm going to connect with her in a significant way, a more substantial way, we have to work at keeping open communication with one another. I can't assume that we're on the same page. She can't assume that I understand what she's thinking and feeling and desiring. We have to talk about it, which means we have to create space for it. We have to work at it. It doesn't happen naturally because we do it very differently. Men do it side by side, having an experience together. Women need to face one another, share information and feelings. So guys, I hate to tell you, but you're going to have some conversations. You're going to have to open up. You have to share what you're thinking. You're going to have to find words for those emotions that you're feeling. It may feel like a foreign language at first, but it's so necessary. Not only do we have to share information, but we need to gain understanding. This means we need to develop good listening skills. It means we need to ask more questions than we do make declarations or statements or accusations. Before we speak what the truth is about any particular situation or the problems or the struggles we're having in our marriage, we need to ask questions first. Seek to understand, where is our spouse coming from? What are they experiencing? You can have the exact same experience and interpret it in two very different ways. Spouses, if you're not talking about it, if you're not seeking deeper understanding, you'll find yourself butting heads more often than not. Gain understanding. Become good listeners. And share experiences. This one's probably more for the husband than the wife, but do things together. Go to shows. Engage in some activity outdoors, hiking or some athletic experience. Take trips. Go to concerts. Just sit outdoors and enjoy the beauty of God's creation together. Have sex. That's a pretty great one. Share experiences. Involve yourselves together. Create time and space to go do something together. Men, sometimes that might mean going to Marshall's, which is maybe my least favorite activity on the planet. Find a way to make it enjoyable and fun. Not only do we need to connect with one another, but we need to remember that in this covenant relationship that we've entered, not only did you make promises to your spouse, but you made those promises standing before a holy God, asking him to be involved and active in the building of this relationship, this marriage. Connect with your spouse, but connect with your Creator, with your Heavenly Father as well. Worship together, pray together, learn together, grow together. As you pursue the Lord, the two of you will grow closer together. Ecclesiastes says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. This is this cooperative effort between two people. The next expression says, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. In this covenant that you have entered into, you've made holy vows before a God who loves you, who has created marriage to be a reflection of his own triune relationship with the Son and the Spirit. Connect with each other. Not only do we need to connect with each other, but we need to practice cherishing one another. Connect with one another and pretend you like it. How do we cherish one another? Ephesians 5, Paul kind of cuts right to the chase. He says, however, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself. And the wife must respect her husband. Men are hardwired to understand this kind of unwritten code of respect, of honor. And the Bible instructs wives to learn how to honor their husbands. This doesn't come naturally for women. Women are those who cherish and love and care for very well. Men struggle with that. Men know instantly when somebody has been disrespected, but may turn a blind eye to someone being unloved or treated harshly. And women, they know when they've not been loved well, when they've been neglected. But sometimes they don't see disrespect played out toward their spouses. And so the Bible gives us instructions to practice doing the thing that doesn't come most natural to us. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, cherish and honor and respect your husbands. Cherishing is a pursuit of one another, a chasing after. There's plenty of that in the dating relationship. Sometimes we quit chasing our spouse. Once we've been married, we feel like once the ring goes on and we've signed the paperwork, we don't need to chase anymore. Now we've captured, and now we can just live together. But we still need to be pursued. If you look in the Bible, in the book of Song of Songs, we see this beautiful piece of poetry that Solomon wrote about the love of his life. I'll warn you, if you haven't read Song of Songs, it's fairly graphic. Okay? But in this beautiful Hebrew poetry, we see a husband and a wife who chase after, who continue to pursue one another. She says this in Song of Songs about her husband Solomon. All night long on my bed, I look for the one my heart loves. I look for him, but did not find him. I will get up now and go about the city through its streets and squares. I will search for the one my heart loves. So I looked for him, but I did not find him. The watchmen found me, and they made their rounds in the city. So she says to them, have you seen the one my heart loves? Scarcely I had passed them when I found the one my heart loves. I held him and would not let go. You know, we see this image of a young bride who wakes up in the middle of the night and her husband is gone. And she longs for his presence, so much so that she gets up, leaves the house, and begins wandering the city, wondering where he went, asking others to help her find him. And when she does, she embraces him and refuses to let go. Husbands and wives, we need to continue pursuing one another, chasing after one another. They need to know. Husbands, your wife needs to know. You still desire her. You still chase her. You still love her. Wives, same for your husbands. Not only do we need to continue pursuing each other, but we need to make a regular habit of praising one another, to them and to others. We see this all through the Proverbs and especially in the Song of Songs. Proverbs 31 is all about the godly woman who is praised. And in the middle of that passage, the proverb says, her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. We need to make regular habit of praising our spouses. In Song of Songs, we see him praise her. You are altogether beautiful. My darling, there is no flaw in you. Song of Songs 4:7. She praises him in chapter 5, verse 10. My beloved is radiant and ruddy. She's speaking to those around her. Outstanding among 10,000. What guy doesn't want to be described as ruddy? He's radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. He says about her in chapter 2, like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. They sing one another's praises. We pursue each other, we praise one another, and we need to make regular habit of also pleasing one another, looking for ways to please our spouses. Song of Songs has a lot to say about that. I'm not going to read it to you this morning. Like I said, it's pretty graphic. You'll find it in the middle of Song of Songs. Lots of instructions on how to please your spouse. But I believe a lot of married people are being selfish when it comes to their most intimate moments. I hear constantly about spouses that are having unfulfilling sex lives. And I think mostly it's probably because it's selfish. If you are not physically connecting with your spouse in order to please them and bring pleasure to them, you're seeking to please yourself. And the most intimate moments, the opportunity to connect with another person, if you're in it for yourself, you're missing what it was created for. Husbands, make it about your wives. Find out what they need. Find out what they desire. Find out what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. Make it about the other. Connecting, cherishing. The third one is all about working together. Practice cooperating with one another. A healthy marriage is mutually responsible for its own growth and stability. That means both husband and wife have to work toward their desired ends and having a healthy relationship. Again, in Ecclesiastes, we see Solomon, two are better than one, for they have a good return for their labor. If either one of them falls down, the other one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? The one may be overpowered. Two can defend themselves. We see Solomon talk about working together, helping each other in our failures, defending one another against outside threats and forces. Ephesians 5 is instructions to husbands and wives how to work together, giving each husband and wife their responsibilities to protect and nourish their relationship with their spouse. Paul, again, in his succinct sort of way, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, says the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. You're responsible for the other. Husbands, your responsibility is the health and the fulfillment of your wife. Wives, your responsibility is to that of your husband above all others. Your responsibility is to initiate connection. To express how much you cherish and love and adore the other, to cooperate and work together toward your desired goals. The last one, I don't think you'll like very much. Fair warning. A healthy marriage is one that practices correcting one another. A healthy marriage learns how to grow together, how to correct one another. None of us comes into marriage having it figured out. In fact, I could probably better say it, none of us comes into marriage really having a clue, usually. And so this relationship that you're entering into is more than just this romantic, deep connection where you believe you found your soulmate. Marriage is meant to grow you as an individual by the loving, caring hands of a partner for life. Proverbs 10:17 says, "Whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray." Being corrected is not easy, and being corrected by your spouse is one of the most difficult parts of a healthy, loving relationship and marriage. But real intimacy grows out of our ability to be corrected. Real loving intimacy grows out of a mutual effort by two individuals to be honest about their shortcomings and work together, mutually responsible, to grow into a relationship that more closely reflects Christ and his church. Husbands and wives, there is or should be no safer space in the entire world than in your own kitchen or your own bedroom, where you and your spouse can be honest and transparent with one another. It won't feel good. It may hurt. Dr. Eggerichs, early on in his book, Love and Respect, says one of the earliest commandments we need to make as husbands and wives is to just set it in our minds and our hearts. My spouse is a good person who desires the best for our marriage. I'm committed to believing and trusting that my spouse wants a good, healthy, enjoyable, vibrant marriage just as much as I do. Because when correction comes, we need to lean into that reality. That my spouse isn't here just to harm me and belittle me and tear me down and to destroy me. There's something in this, in between us, that is either causing a roadblock or a threat to our relationship. Now, that doesn't mean your spouse is saying it right or carrying the right tone or coming at the right time. But we can still understand that there is a nugget of truth to be learned in our difficult conversations with our spouses. And so what do you need to do to mine for the nugget of truth in the pain that's been expressed, or the disappointment or the frustration that's been expressed? Learn to disagree well. Learn to come to terms with your conflicts in a spirit of love and affection, a desire to continue connecting and cooperating and cherishing one another. That means we need to guard our words and our actions in those moments. Proverbs 4 says, "Keep your mouth free of perversity. Keep corrupt talk from your lips." Proverbs 11 says, "A kind-hearted woman gains honor, but a ruthless man gains only wealth. Those who are kind benefit themselves, but the cruel bring ruin on themselves." And one that I heard from the time I was a young boy: a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. When we come into conflict, when we are transparent and seek to connect by offering a source of frustration or disappointment with our spouse, what's our default response? Is it to snap back harshly? Is it to throw more fuel on the fire? Or is it to trust that your spouse has a desire for a good, healthy, enjoyable marriage just as you do? Learn to fight fairly. Learn to argue and disagree rightly for mutual edification by being receptive and understanding that at some point in this marriage, you will be the wrong one. Each of us will be wrong, some of us on a pretty regular basis. Let us therefore, according to Romans 14, make every effort to do what leads to peace and mutual edification. Paul's writing about issues that Christians might disagree on, social issues, but it applies to our marriages as well. Remember what you're fighting for. Proverbs says, "Hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers over all wrongs." Practices for a healthy marriage. Continue to find ways to connect with one another, shared experiences, shared information. Learn to cherish one another in new ways. Find new ways to express your adoration for your spouse in both word and in practice. Cooperate with one another. Correct one another. Learn to apologize and sharpen one another as we pursue godly relationship with our spouses that honors them, that builds them up, that makes them more like Christ as they do the same for us. Father God, we come before you this morning recognizing that the most intimate, the closest of relationships also offer sometimes the deepest wounds. We recognize in a room with this many people that there are both marriages that are just sailing beautifully and smoothly right now, but no doubt there are marriages that are hurting and struggling. Marriages that have abandoned these practices many years ago. God, I pray that you would help us in those instances to have small egos, to have short memories, and to be willing to come back to the table, to connect, to cherish, to cooperate, to be corrected, that we might love one another well as you love us fully and completely. God, would you bring healing to our marriages that are struggling? Would you bring vibrancy to all of our husbands with their wives and wives with their husbands, that you might be honored and we might be built up as your bride and as spouses of one another. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen.